Hello, everyone. My name is William Henry Curry. I'm the music director of the Durham Symphony. And for several years, I've heard about the legendary Polly Murray. And I began to read her memoirs about a year ago. I found her book of poetry, Dark Testament. And there's a magnificent documentary, which I believe is titled My Name is Polly Murray. And the long story short, she's one of the great African American heroes and deserves to be a household name. I'm thrilled to pay tribute to her on our April 10th concert at Durham's classic Hayti Heritage Center. We'll be doing 4 world premieres, local composers. One of these premieres is a piece I wrote, a revision of a piece I wrote. I took my title from Murray's book of poetry, Dark Testament. And this is a piece that pays tribute to 3 iconic African-American women. They are Mahalia Jackson, the Queen of Gospel, who was at the March on Washington speech with King, and Harriet Tubman, the mother of the Underground Railroad, who needs no introduction, I suppose. Her name should be on the $20 bill someday. And then, of course, Polly Murray. I am so moved by her life story, and I'm so grateful that her niece is here with us today, Rosita Stevens-Holsey. A brief introduction. She was born in Massachusetts during World War II. She's lived in Wyoming and Kansas, and she's had a great career in education and consulting, member of the National Organization of Women, the NAACP, the Polly Murray chapter, and she's the president of the DC Design Consortium. So thank you so much, Rosita, for being here today to talk about your story and the story of Polly Murray.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome. I'm just thrilled to be here representing my family and helping to hopefully enhance the legacy of Polly Murray. As you mentioned, I have lived in several places and also had a variety of vocations, but I consider myself now beginning one of the most important facets of my life, even as I turned 80 years old this month. So I'm very hopeful that I will have at least 5 or 6 good years to spread the word about my Aunt Polly. Like many of you, I'm learning new and wonderful and unusual things about her because for the 43 years that our life intersected, she was merely my aunt, someone I knew, someone I enjoyed, someone I respected, someone that who really has quite an interesting sense of humor, but a lot of people did not see that because she always seemed so serious when she was talking to others. And likewise, the things that she was really involved in, really interested in, and spent her life's work on were things that are and were very serious things in the field of human rights, women's rights, civil rights, and of course, in the field of religion. So I'm so glad that I could be here with you today and share some of my Polly experiences that you may not know about.
When did you first meet her?
Um, as a child, I lived in Washington, D.C. With my mom, and I had another aunt, Mildred, whose family also lived in Washington. So we were her, what I called her Washington, D.C. headquarters. If you can imagine, and all the things she was involved in at Howard and afterwards, she was always needing or wanting to come to Washington or come through Washington. So she didn't have to stay at a hotel. She could stay with family and join us for, big family dinners and marathon discussions and things of that nature. I was also very lucky that when I began my career with IBM in Manhattan, she allowed me to live in her apartment for a year. Um, she was not there. She was off on one of her, I believe it was at Brandeis, but she allowed me to be there. And people often ask me what are my fondest memories of being with her. Besides the family gatherings, I would have to say the opportunity to go meet the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, at that time, she was no longer the First Lady, but if any of you have read about Pauli Murray or read The Firebrand and the First Lady, Pauli became a very close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, mainly in contacting her to help Negroes, as we were often called at that time in history. And she began what is commonly called her confrontation with typewriter. She had a typewriter, an old fashioned typewriter. Many young people may never have seen a typewriter, but it was a precursor of the word processor and the computer. And she was famous for it because if there was anything she read about, anything she heard about on the radio, any conversation she got involved in, especially if she was concerned about the outcome or upset about what was going on, she went to that typewriter. She wrote a letter or a newspaper article, what would I guess commonly be called an op-ed now. And she sent that off, whether it was to the Washington Post, the New York Times, the White House, it did not matter. She could not be stopped. So I always think of her and the letters that she wrote to very important people. It was one of her ways of being involved in civil and human rights by making her voice heard, no matter whether anyone had heard about her or not.
So she was this incredibly driven person, a person on a mission. My dad was born 50 years after the end of slavery. So that generation knew something about glass ceilings. My parents never talked to me about how they felt growing up in an era where their dreams were going to be exceedingly limited. But when I was 10 years old on a family trip to Washington, I saw colored and white drinking fountains,
Mhm.
and I was totally innocent. I asked my mom, is the water colored in those fountains? And all I remember is her saying, that's their fault and not your fault. So, how would you describe her optimism, pessimism, general attitude about having to deal with something that she shouldn't have had to deal with?
Well, you may know that when she was very young, 3 years old, um, she moved to Durham. And she and all her brothers and sisters, the other five brothers and sisters, had been born in Baltimore. Um, After my mother and the youngest brother's birth, my grandmother died. So Aunt Polly they were all very young, but Aunt Polly was about three. She was taken to Durham. Actually, she said she would like to go to Durham and live with her namesake, Anna Pauline Fitzgerald, her aunt. Um, whom she had stayed with once for about 9 months when their mother was carrying another baby.
Hmm.
So she had become very aware of what we commonly call Jim Crow, of the fact that Blacks were discriminated against. She was determined that she was not going to ride on the back of the bus. So she would walk for miles to go someplace or not go if it meant that she would have to get on a bus. She didn't want to have to go to the back of a restaurant or be hungry because she couldn't go in a certain restaurant. So they would pack lunches and she would carry them with her if she were leaving. So she had a real sense of what was fair and what was not fair from a little girl. And there's a story that in my book that I I love. When she was less than 4, her Aunt Pauline was making pancakes for the family. She lived with her grandparents and 2 aunts. And the grandfather was given 3 pancakes, and Aunt Paulie was given 1. And she just didn't want to have this happen to her. And she confronted everybody at that time. Why did he get 3 pancakes and I only got 1? And she felt it was unfair. She said it was unfair. She told them how distasteful it was to them, but she also had to only get the 1 pancake and eat the 1 pancake. But this was the type of child she was.
Mm.
She was very inquisitive. She wasn't around children very often. She lived with 4 adults. And the books in the house were like Paul Lawrence Dunbar, Booker T. Washington. There were no children's books in the home. So she actually taught herself to read by the time she was 5. And she was reading the newspaper, the Bible, and the adult books that were in the home. So she had a very mature sense of what was going on around her. She knew that her grandmother was afraid of the Ku Klux Klan. She knew that they often came and tried to frighten them in their regalia and what have you. And she knew that the books that she used at school were old and raggedy, and the building that the school was in didn't look like the schools of the white children. She knew that they got hand-me-downs and what have you. So there was always this sense of this isn't fair. I'm a human being just like everybody else. Um, with riding on the bus, she said she had to pay the same fare as anyone else. She felt she should have the same opportunity as to where she sat. And so this were not the kind of things that a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old would normally think about, but these were the kind of conversations that she had with the adults in her home. And like I said, she would read the newspaper to her grandfather. And so she found out things that were going on in the real world.
Remarkable. One of my heroes is Abraham Lincoln. And in
Mhm.
looking through all his personal correspondence and what people said about him, I can't find any hatred of slave owners. I can't find one intemperate remark that says pretty much what the heck are these people think they're doing, thinking this is right. He found a nice way to say that, but I don't find bitterness or contempt um, for the common man. He said God must have loved the common man because he made so many of them. Did she sometimes show her bitterness or pessimism, or was it always on a lofty level? Of course, you were young, and like most older people, she didn't want to embitter you. But what did you feel about her general optimism about what she was doing?
Well, first of all, I found her extremely dedicated in what she did. She was willing to help anyone. She never worried about whether she was going to be paid for it or how much she was going to be paid for it or how long that it took. Um, she was always, whenever she took on a task, whatever it was, she planned to take it all the way to the end.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard bitterness
Mm-hmm.
from her. She always seemed to think more, here is a solution for this. You know, this is not right, or this should not be, or this is inappropriate. And she always had a solution for what it was. Or she also was excellent at research, and she was also excellent at strategizing. So she often would come up with ways in which to approach things that others had not done. And you may have read that uh, theories that she came up with as a student in law school at Howard University were actually the basis for some of the most important civil rights um, laws that we um, thought, at least, we had now, that we have been using for years. And though she didn't always get credit, if you've seen the film about RBG, if you've heard before Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, if you heard her talking about the law, she often gave Aunt Polly, or Polly Murray, credit for the things that she had done. The Brown versus the Board of Education, which now more people are learning, was really based on work that she did as a senior in law school at Howard University. She never got credit for that, but it has been documented and mentioned in the feature film about Thurgood Marshall, uh, and the documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and of course the documentary about Aunt Polly. My name is Polly Murray.
Mm-hmm. I was raised Episcopal,
Oh,
and I wanted to be a minister at one point and then discovered music. And I went away from organized religion, I think, in my mid 20s. And in the last 25 years, spirituality and God have been an extremely important part of my life. I mean, essential, the number one essential in my life. I'm wondering, she wasn't born into the Episcopalian faith, I assume, or was she?
no, she was.
Okay. So I'm wondering, of course, we know that she was the first African American Episcopalian priest. And I'm wondering what the bliss of religion, the importance of religion was for her.
I think religion was important to her all of her life. Uh, but when she was baptized in a church in North Carolina, where her grandmother had been baptized, Cornelia, and so she had always been exposed to the Episcopal religion, and she went almost every week. But her Black people had to sit up in the balcony, separated from white parishioners. So she understood immediately, again, the difference in status, in what you were allowed to do as a person of color and what have you. She was always, I think, very spiritual and very religious, but she was not a person who felt, um, I want to serve the church in a formal way in her youth. It came very late in life. And when she decided that she had served in the area of the law, civil rights, human rights, women's rights, it was really a combination of things. Someone she cared about very much died. She took it extremely hard.
Mhm.
And about the same time, a bishop, I believe he was a bishop in Boston, uh, recognized that he felt she had a gift. And he suggested to her and asked her, had she ever thought of studying religion and going on. And of course, she was, I believe, in her 60s at the time. And so I guess it just seemed like the right time for her. And she decided that she would go to the seminary and formally um, study. Now, what was interesting was she knew when she went into the seminary that she would not be able to become a priest because in the Episcopal Church, um, women could not be ordained. But she spent her time in, she completed her studies, and she had, I guess, what you would call lay jobs in the church.
Mhm.
And there were other women also who had sort of moved up to various positions. It's just not the priesthood. But then she took on a much more um, assertive, I'll say, um, idea about that. And so she was in a group of women who started protesting and making their voices heard about women being able to um, become priests. And it took several years, but when the church finally decided to do it, she was in the first group of women who were ordained.
Mm.
And she happened to be the only African American female. So I think just before she was ordained, there had been one uh, white female ordained as a priest. And so that's how she became the first priest in the Episcopal Church. And uh, the thing that I think she didn't regret, but was unfortunate, was that they had a time limit in terms of age. So she went into the priesthood at a very advanced age and
Mhm.
didn't have the time to really make, I guess, the kind of impact I thought she would have made had she been able to serve, 20 years or so. But it was very meaningful to her, and she had not only a commitment to the Episcopal Church, but she worked very hard for interfaith um, action between different denominations. And I think her legacy of love and compassion and hope, um, was recognized.
At what point did you realize that your aunt was one of the most important people in the 20th century? I'm sure you saw her as your Aunt Polly and as a kid, and but I'm reminded of when I met Jamie Bernstein, one of Bernstein's daughters, and she didn't get really how famous her father was until she was looking at the Flintstones, and there was a guy, Leonard Bernstein. And she said, "Oh, Daddy's really famous."
Oh gosh.
So, at what point did this come together for you that this is a remarkable person I'm related to?
Well, there were a few smaller things which, for me as a young person, seemed quite monumental. Uh, her being able to invite me to meet Eleanor Roosevelt and, take me to her home. Of course, this was quite impressive. So I, I thought, hmm, you really know some important people. And I did know some of the important, I mean, did hear stories of and conversations about some of the people. And then and I think it was about 88, I went to Ethel Kennedy's home that had been her home with Robert Kennedy to receive a humanitarian award that Aunt Polly received for the writing of her autobiography, Song in a Weary Throat. So that was another time, but I really had what I call my Polly Murray epiphany when I came um, about 6 years ago to Durham with my niece, who had come the year before to bring her son, because we kept hearing that Duke University had started a project and all of these things that were going on in Durham that and I had never been to Durham. I had never been to our ancestral home. And so my niece decided that she wanted to come here and see for herself. And when she came back, she promised me the next year she would bring me. So I came, and the first night that we arrived, we went to Titus Episcopal Church, and it happened to be the feast where they honor her in July. Of course, I had heard that she had become a saint of the Episcopal Church, so I knew that that was monumental. And so we went to the church, and the entire service was in honor of her. And I was just mesmerized, really, by the things that people said, um, all of the presentations that were made just during the formal service. And then when it was over, they have each time what they call an ice cream social. And it's like a half an hour where, you can get ice cream and people just talk. And then usually they go home. So an hour and a half later, my niece and I are still standing there talking to people who have stood in line over an hour to just meet us. And there were a few people who had met Aunt Polly and knew her. There were some people who had read her books, and there were others who had read books about her. And each person wanted to share something that had meant something to them. And then there were people who just came up and touched me and said, "Can I hold your hand?
Oh my.
You have the same blood that she does." And so I really felt like I was having an out of body experience. I had never, been in a situation like this. I had never heard so many people talk about how wonderful she was, how much she meant to them or to their causes. And when I left, I left that night, and then we went to our ancestral home, and we had the honor and pleasure of meeting Barbara Lau, who gave us a tour. Once you meet Barbara and you see all of the work that her team, her volunteers, and Duke have done, I just felt it was not only an honor to be learning all of this, but it was my responsibility as a family member to say, what can I do to help? How can I help do what you've been doing for years? And that was sort of what started me into what became a more formal
Mhm.
uh, look into her life. and really find out. Of course, the My Name is Pauline Mary, the 90-minute documentary was um, amazing.
Really
uh,
was.
Anyone who sees that, even if they've never ever heard her name, I don't see how they can walk away without thinking, this person has really impacted our history, our government, our rules, our constitution,
Mhm.
uh, and all of the areas in which we have benefited from the work that she did, or just her legal theories. So that's when I really knew. When I saw the RBG documentary
Mhm.
and the film about Thurgood Marshall. And so the more I saw things like that, I realized this is real. And she is more than just the aunt that I loved and respected all of my life.
I can certainly identify with that moment where people wanted to touch you, because when I did meet Jamie Bernstein, one of Bernstein's daughters, for the first time, I never got a chance to meet him. So I wanted to thank him for his major impact on my life, but he's no longer alive when I'm meeting her. So I get a chance to thank her. And she had experienced this before, but she was so gracious about it. I need heroes in my life. Uh,
Mhm.
Talking about resiliency. Whenever I go to a high school or a university, I talk about keep on keeping on. How do you manage to resist your own self-destructive tendencies and the external problems that can bring you down? Eleanor Roosevelt, what a hero. Abraham Lincoln, Leonard Bernstein, Pauli Murray. I'm reading her memoirs now, and Song in a Weary Heart. Do I have that right?
Weary throat. Hmm.
And what are your thoughts about the memoirs? Anything that leapt out at you that you were surprised to see, or etc.?
Um, I didn't know a lot about the family um, of the 18 and 1900s. And, she did not have computers. She used, like I said, that typewriter, that famous typewriter. I
Mhm.
remember the months that she spent in Washington at the archives. That was the old fashioned way, when you literally had to pour through documents and papers and books and charts. Whereas nowadays, we can go to the computer, we can go to Google, and there's so many things we can find out. So there were many, many things. No one had told me uh, about my great grandparents serving in the Union Army, uh, during the Civil War. So there
Mhm.
were all kinds of things that I learned. Like I said, I had never been to Durham. I had never seen the home. Um, so I learned an awful lot. And I learned a lot about Polly. Um, People don't know that most of her life, um, she really, because she was shut out, overlooked, um, because she was either female or she was an African American. So here's a woman who was the first African American to get a doctorate from Yale University in law, who couldn't basically get a job as a lawyer. Really, only once in her life. Well, she was a deputy attorney general in California after she received her master's in law at Berkeley.
Mhm.
Um, but for a woman, it was very difficult to really make a living as a lawyer in her generation. And she worked occasionally. In fact, when she did state laws on race and color for the Methodist Church, she, I guess, got um, a grant or a certain amount of money to do that. And it gave her the opportunity to open up her own legal office. And with the money for the book, while she was writing the book, she was able to help people and to have some clients. There was also another situation where she worked for another lawyer who promised he'd make her a partner, put her name on the door and what have you. And he really cheated her out of the money she deserved for the litigation and all she did in court and those kinds of things. So she did not have a long legacy of working as an attorney. But luckily, her fallback was that she had always really, in her heart, wanted to be a poet and a writer. And most people cannot make a living as a poet and often as a writer. So she did those things. And when she was upset about something, she wrote, like I said, short stories. She submitted her poetry to anybody who would look at it. She had quite a few published poems and short stories, but maybe she'd get $50 or $75, something like that. Um, but she was able to do that. And she really lived just, I feel like, a couple of levels above poverty much of her life. When she was in law school, our cousin, who was dean of women, had carved a little place for her in a student lounge off a restroom in the dorm. She couldn't afford to pay for a dormitory and to pay for, meal cards and things like that. But she never gave up. No matter what it was, she would go without food, to have money for the paper or pens or supplies she needed. So she was often quite sick. She would come down with bouts of illness. And a lot of that was malnutrition, really. But she was so full of pride, she didn't come to her brothers and sisters who really lived an upper middle class life through their childhood and beyond. She never had her hand out for help. She just always found a way to try to accomplish the things that she wanted to accomplish or the things she committed to accomplish.
I started to read her memoirs about a year ago, and I came to the part where she talks about she barely knew her father. I think you said that he was probably murdered.
Yes.
He was about 3 years old.
Well, her mother died when she was 3. And so her father was left with 6 children, and he could not handle it. So at first, he kept the 3 oldest children and a brother and sister who were aunt and uncle. On the Murray side, took the younger 3. That was my mother and Uncle Raymond. And it turned out that they thought that her father, who was a teacher and a poet and a writer, was insane, and they had him committed to Crownsville in Maryland, to an institution for Negroes who were considered out of control. Now, oftentimes, if a Negro had a fight, with a white person, what have, they would commit them to an institution. They weren't necessarily insane. That was just a way to handle the situation. Well, it turned out he had suffered, I think, from yellow fever. And they really believe that that is why he had these bouts of violence or seemed to be uncontrolled. But at any rate, when she moved to Durham, she always said, when I'm older, I'm going to go get my dad out of that place.
Oh,
And she really wanted to do that. But he was killed by a guard
mhm.
in the institution. And it was determined the guard had killed him. And the guard was actually, a white guard was actually sentenced to 10 years in prison. But she was about, I think, 13 when he actually died. But she really did not see him after she was 3 and moved to Durham, even though she went to Baltimore
Mhm.
to see him once and was unable to.
Well, when I read this grueling account, I thought of the spiritual, sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
Mhm.
She was, and a fatherless child too. So when I wanted to write a musical tribute to her, I used snippets of that to inspire me and to create a piece I call Love and Loss.
Oh, okay.
And I am so moved by the poetry of Dark Testament, which is why I appropriated the title. I couldn't resist. One day I want to write a song
Mhm.
based on these poetry. And speaking of that, did she ever mention a favorite type of music or a favorite song?
Well, again, going back to my cousin, the harpist, um, I heard a piece on the radio one day when I was with Aunt Polly, and I mentioned to her that I believe it was a piece that um, I had heard my cousin play, and we just got to talking about music. It was really the first time we had a conversation about music. And she told me that she liked classical music. I know that I believe they had a piano in the family home on Carroll Street in Durham. And in her apartment, she actually had a very small organ that she used to play hymns and sing. Now, I'm tone deaf, so there's not a chance that I would ever join in with anybody who's singing under any circumstances. But I found out that she liked Amazing Grace, that she liked I think it's called the Hymn of Joy. And I think it's Joyful, Joyful, We Adorn Thee. And this, I looked that up, but this was a poem, I believe, written by Henry Van Dyke.
Mhm.
And he had planned to have it set to Beethoven's Ode to Joy.
Yes.
And so I can see, that that was sort of like a combination of the classical music she liked and the religious music that she liked. There was another song. I went out to Texas um, to participate with the Union of Black Episcopalians and the Southwest Seminary. They created a Pauli Murray scholarship
Mhm.
for specifically and especially for women who want to go into the priesthood.
Mhm.
And while I was there for 3 days, I went to church where they had a sermon in honor of her and music in honor of her. So I learned about some of the songs that she liked.
Mhm.
I think one was Holy, Holy, Holy
Yes.
by Audrey Ashad, I believe. And Great is Thy Faithfulness
Boys.
by Thomas Chittum. And so I got to hear the music that she liked, a wonderful sermon completely about her. And again, these are the kinds of inspiration that, sort of uplift us and give us the strength to go on with those things that we're working on especially knowing all that she went through. I feel I can give the time that I have left to honor her and promote her. And I think you may know that I actually on my birthday, March 2nd, on my 80th birthday, was the launch of my children's book. And so I'm going to show you that. It's
Yes.
Pauli Murray, The Life of a Pioneering Feminist and Civil Rights Activist. And I'm very proud of that. It's actually for middle school, high school, young people, but it's written for any adult. In other words, the
Yeah.
language is not written down to a child. And we just wanted to present it to that age group so that people can be inspired, children can hopefully be inspired, never give up, learn some of her values and how she managed to navigate through all that she went through.
Mhm.
Uh, and so it has teacher activities, PowerPoints, all kinds of things that, can be used in the classroom.
Well, we are standing on someone's shoulders, many of our ancestors. And you mentioned your third cousin, who was actually very famous, very important in my life, Ann Hobson Pilot, I think you said
Yeah,
her. So she was the harpist for the Boston Symphony, the equal of any orchestra in the world. During
right.
this time, I am growing up and starting to get really excited about classical music. She's playing with the Boston Symphony on TV, Boston Pops with Arthur Fiedler, and she's the only Black person in the orchestra. And that was important, of course.
Absolutely.
And I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I think your aunt passed away.
Yes.
And the Pittsburgh Symphony had one Black person,
The
Patricia
pianist,
Gladys Jennings, and then Paul Ross. But how wonderful to have these role models.
right.
People before us didn't have these role models. They had to become role models themselves. So I'm glad to hear that Polly loved classical music. And of course, people of her generation, my parents' generation, everyone had a piano in the home,
Yeah.
right? And so somebody played a little bit of classical music, Beethoven, Fiore, Lisa, or something. And people had a little organ, a harmonium of some sort. So that's before, of course, my parents were born before radio,
Uh,
let alone TV and whatnot. So that's extremely fascinating, and we are all role models. When I first came to North Carolina in 1996, this was still Jesse Helms country,
oh,
and the Klan had rallies in Raleigh not a few years before I came, and so I learned out very quickly that I was the only Black conductor in the history of North Carolina to have a staff position. There were guests that came and went. And then as music director of the Durham Symphony, I found out that I was the first African-American music director, principal conductor of an orchestra in the American South.
wow.
So I keep thinking, wow, I don't think of myself as being a trailblazer. And
Oh,
I'm
you
writing my memoirs now. And you should do that too if you haven't already. And what I'm finding out is, I'm sure, like your Aunt Polly, it's not so much fun because you have to unearth some painful memories that you'd rather have suppressed,
Mhm.
about your own negative activities and what was done to you. So in recent days, even, I've managed to get over the unhappiness and bitterness about myself and others. My mom said to me, I lost her when I was 19, but she left me with a few things. One was, if you expect people to do what they ought to do, you're going to be a very unhappy
Great
person.
person.
So, she knew me already when she said that to me. We can't expect perfection from ourselves and from others. And the fact that your aunt was able to transcend her bitterness, her dislike. Martin Luther King said, as you know, It's too much to hate.
Mm-hmm.
And Nixon said in his farewell speech, you just destroy yourself if you hate others. So she had a lot of emotion. She was driven. She channeled that into doing great things for others. And the fact that she wasn't reimbursed for it, honored in her lifetime, is a fact of life for many, many, many great people. But the fact that they lived and sacrificed for us, as you said already, that makes us want to be stronger.
Absolutely. A lot of people don't know that she left 90, I believe it was 91 boxes, like copier boxes of documents, photos, journals. She kept a journal from a childhood all the way up. And these boxes were turned in to the Schlesinger Library of Harvard and Radcliffe. And so people who want to learn about her or check facts about her can actually see in her own handwriting or on tapes that she made in her own voice. Um, some of the things she thought, some of the things she did. Uh, in the beginning, it was so jolting to me when I first saw during the Sundance uh, Film Festival, My Name is Polly Murray. And when it began and I heard her voice, I mean, it was like lightning, but no one had prepared me for that. And I thought it was, I mean, it was marvelous. It set the tone. Um, I don't even like to, when people ask me to read her poetry or read her quotes, because her voice was so unique and so profound that I know that I can't sound like that. And so I, you know, don't volunteer to do it. But that was something that just left such an impression on me to hear in her own voice what she said. And then to see for 90 minutes how transformative she was and all the things that she had done in her life, and how sad of all the things that had been so unfortunate that she had been through in her life. But she rose above all of them. And when she could not, when she could not um, accomplish something, when she, when she could not accomplish something, for example, during the March on Washington, when the men who were foremost in that civil rights march and in a lot of the work, they were out in the forefront. That didn't mean they were the only ones working, but they didn't allow women to walk with them.
Oh,
And even Rosa Parks, who, was touted as a civil rights icon, was told to walk with the wives. So Aunt Polly was very upset about that. And she made herself known. But what she would do in situations like that, oh, okay, well, the men aren't going to let me do this, or they're not going to take seriously the things that are important to women. I'll go out and start my own organization, or I'll go around that and figure out how to do that. And that's what she did all of her life. She figured out how to circumvent whatever was going on the way that she didn't feel it should be. And she worked toward another way to try to solve that problem.
remarkable. I call myself a world-class complainer. And I think of the activistic life that you and she led. And by the way, now you're not 80. You need not to trifle with me about this. This is on tape. If you say so, I'll have to believe you. What a life you had, changing lives.
I have. There are five of us. Um, I operate as the matriarch because my cousin, who was Mildred's daughter, so my mother and Mildred lived the longest of the siblings, and excuse me, and my cousin is 89, but she's legally blind. So all the kinds of things she would do as a matriarch, I've, taken over in terms of writing and answering questions and, being involved in all things Paulie Murray. I do that. And then my sister is 2 years younger than I am. She'll be 78. She'll be upset if she hears me saying it, but she'll be 78 this summer. And then there are two male cousins, the sons of Aunt Paulie's youngest uh, brother. So there are five of us left, and I just hope, I have 5 or 6 good years to try to carry on some of the work she did, or at least to make people aware of it. I've already co-authored a picture book about her. So I'm really trying to, you know, get information down to children when they're like sponges and they're inquisitive and they want to know everything.
Mhm.
And so hopefully that will be published in the near future.
Well, thank you for writing that children's book. I really, really want to read that. Um, what did you know about your aunt's sexuality and when?
We never, and this is one of the things that I think is so unfortunate. For people of her generation, number one, and people who were involved in the kind of things she did, she had to be very careful um, about her image, I guess you would say. And also, I think it is so sad that even the people she loved and the people she trusted, because of her own uh, gender identity confusion and issues and um, unresolved
Mhm,
parts of it, she didn't discuss that with
mhm,
her family even. And once when we were together, I said something about would she ever want to get married? And she told me that she had been married. She was married when she first came out of college, out of Hunter. But excuse me, it turns out it was, I'll call it a marriage of survival.
mhm,
When she graduated, was in the middle of the Depression. And even with her college degree, she couldn't get a steady job. People who had had steady jobs were losing steady jobs.
mhm,
People were um, really living on the street. And so she and a gentleman that she knew married for really survival,
mhm,
thought that, sort of like two people can live cheaper than one. And that didn't last very long. She told me only 6 weeks. I believe legally it was longer than that, but I think probably they only tried to stay together, uh, for 6 weeks. And then she was lucky Eleanor Roosevelt had started these camps for Black women, and she was able to go to Camp Terra, and where they worked and learned skills and had a roof over their head, and that um, kind of thing. So,
Well, she's a role model for so many young people nowadays that aren't tied forever to whatever the gender issues of the day are. And of course, it's much more courageous to be so then. You have to tell me how to pronounce his name, Bayard or Bayard Rustin.
Uh, Byron, I think, Byron Rusk.
He was, as you know, in King's inner circle.
Yes.
And King knew he was gay. And at one point, the FBI was trying to get him to throw Bayard or Bayard Rustin out. King refused. But you're right, of that generation, nobody ever talked about these things.
You had to
But
be very careful.
had to be very careful. Billy Strayhorn is another example. We had to
Yes.
be Duke Ellington's shadow. He was gay, and to be happy with that. Of course, you may know that he first started studying music here in North Carolina, in Hillsborough, and they have a great plaque to him up there. My parents knew him when they were growing up in Pittsburgh. The day your aunt died, tell me your thoughts that day.
Actually, I was out of the country at the time, but a story about the time when she died. The family knew. Now, my mother was still alive, and Bonnie's mother, Aunt Mildred, was still alive. And um, Aunt Mildred and her daughter, Bonnie, went to Pittsburgh to visit Aunt Polly. Uh, we knew that she had pancreatic cancer, and we knew just the general statistics about pancreatic cancer. You know, 95% of people at that time didn't make it. But no one had any idea that her time was really drawing to a close. So that weekend, they went up and they spent the weekend with her. And during that weekend in her home, she shared with them for the first time ever that about Renee or Rennie, the love of her life. And this had never been discussed before, hinted at, or anything of that nature. And I don't know what my aunt thought. My aunt was one of these people who I think that she was a nurse. Both of them were actually nurses, and she could deal with anything. I mean, she was the strongest person in the family, even stronger than the two boys, two sons. But she was able to vent and to at least share that with them. And they said to her when they left, um, we're going back to Washington, but next weekend we're coming back and we're going to bring Rosetta, that's my mother, with us. Whether she's kicking or screaming, we're going to bring her to see you. I really always thought my mother was Aunt Polly's favorite. And she hadn't seen her in a while. So they left. And Aunt Polly died the next day. So that was very revealing. But neither of them shared that with me either. It wasn't until I began researching and writing and going around the country and talking about Aunt Polly and trying to enhance her legacy that my cousin, the one who's legally blind, shared that with me. So that was really the only discussion that I've actually had with a family member about Aunt Polly's gender identity. Now, strangers come up to me and ask me that all the time. And they also ask me what pronouns would I attach to her. And I just merely say to them that I always knew her as my aunt. I was always her niece. She was always Aunt Polly, and she was always she, her, or hers. And that's the way I will always describe her. But I recognize in the times of today, the evolution or the revolution of not only people feeling more comfortable about talking about themselves, but people identifying themselves. I've been to meetings where everybody, had it on their name tag. And actually, the first time I saw it, I was completely unaware of the process. Um, and so I had to, look that up myself. But um, I've read many times that she felt like she was a man in a woman's body.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, I knew that when she was a child, her Aunt Pauline allowed her to wear slacks around the house, and she couldn't wear slacks to school, and she couldn't wear slacks to church.
Yeah.
But she could, you know, when she was in the house, she said, her little boy girl. So, of course, I didn't know any of that until I began researching myself. What I hold in my heart is just how painful it must have been for her not to be able to share those kind of things with the brothers and sisters that she loved and she felt so close to, that she um, really was living a life of secrecy. At least she thought she was,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know.
Well, I know she revered Eleanor Roosevelt, and Eleanor loved her too. And I think she had a few problems with FDR, Franklin,
Yes.
husband. That's another conversation. But he's one of my heroes because he was a so-called polio victim that completely transcended that. And in his last inaugural address, the fourth one, which I think was maybe 2 months before he died, and he knew he was fading, it's very, very brief and very from the heart, very personal. I don't think any speechwriter got a hold of it. And he says that we think sometimes that civilization is going downhill, but those are just setbacks. It's always, as Martin Luther King said, always upwards. And there are setbacks, but then we recover, setback, we recover. When we think of, I never thought I'd see a black president. I never thought we'd see gay marriage. Now the gender talk is completely new. So even in this time of turmoil and polarization, I think it's important for me and others to realize, yes, this has happened before. We've been at each other's throats before. But when I think of your aunt and you and your life of positivity, let's just not complain. Let's do something about it. It doesn't have to be global. It can
Hmm.
be community activity. Anytime you help another person, I think God is smiling on you.
Hmm.
So it doesn't have to be global. You've lived an unbelievable life. I want to thank you personally for caring for others and devoting your time to education and consulting. You're a remarkable person, and truly, it was an honor for me to meet you and interview and touch your Aunt Polly through you.
Well, thank you so much. And it was an honor to talk with you. And I look forward to hearing your music and to meeting you. I come to Durham quite a bit. I'm on the board of the Pauli Murray Center. And so I would love to hear a concert live and
Yes, right.
in person.
We will make that happen. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You're quite welcome. And goodbye.
Okay. Gosh, Rosita, was that the best interview ever, Tina?